In this lesson we're going to talk about some pages that you need to have that are permanent pages on your Google News site. And this is a critical lesson because Google News requires you to have certain pages, and the kind of information on those pages is very, very important for you to be able to get accepted as a approved Google News source. So I hope that you are listening and taking good notes in this lesson because you'll need to know what's in here. It's not very difficult to do, but you really need to know what to do. In fact, when you apply to Google News, there are two pages that they ask you about explicitly. One is the Contact Us page, and the second one is your staff page where you list your writers and editors. Some other pages that you will probably have are a privacy policy page, which we've mentioned earlier, and perhaps an About Us page or an advertising page, those kinds of pages. We're going to start by talking about the writers page. The writers page is very, very important for this reason. You recall that earlier in the course we had a lesson that said that two things that Google were interested in was one, high quality journalistic content, and number two, that the news organization applying for inclusion into Google News is a real organization made up of real people. So the reason that on the application form that they ask to see your staff page or writers page is because they are very serious about the requirement that your newspaper be staffed with real people who write real articles. So we're going to talk about the writers page first. I'm going to show you an example. This site is called ADI.news.com, and they've been included in Google News for several years actually. And here's the writers page is typical of sites that are in Google News, but I'm going to make some recommendations related to this that you really need to consider. First of all, many people who have applied to Google News without having multiple writers, they've applied and they create a writers page, maybe like this one even, and they just make up names, they fabricate biographies, and they list a lot of people who never existed. I don't agree with that from an ethical perspective. I think that you don't need to do that because there are thousands and thousands of writers all over the world who would love to write articles for your newspaper, and they do so at really a very reasonable cost. So before you apply to Google News, one of the things that I'm going to explain later on is how to locate those writers and get articles from them and biographies. Now, it's good to have convincing biographies, and if you have real writers, then they will have real bios with real experience and education and so on. And that's the kind of information that you're going to put on your writers page. You're going to put the real name, where they actually went to school in case Google decides to investigate whether this is a real person or not, and what they've been doing for a living. Now, you don't have to have superstars. We've had a number of newspapers accepted that had articles that were written by college students, and we were very clear in the bio that this is an upcoming writer. He's studying. He might not even be studying journalism. He might be studying business or technology or something else, but he loves writing, and he writes about these kind of topics. So honesty is the most important thing here. Google doesn't have a standard that says that your writers must have X amount of experience for these kinds of organizations, but they do have a policy that says that they have to be real people and there have to be a certain number of them. Another question that's on the Google application form is how many people are in your organization, and common experience tells us that Google is looking for organizations that have more than 5 people. So there's a category that you can select on the application form that says 6 to 10 or 10 to 20 and above, those kinds of categories. And if you don't have at least 6 different writers, then I think that your chances of getting included in Google News are actually quite small. But again, the good news is finding 6 writers is not difficult at all. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, another suggestion that I would make for the writers page is that not only do you have real writer names with their associated biographies that are also real, and preferably written by the writer themselves, because if the writer writes it themselves, likely they're going to have some of their own personality in the biography. It's going to appear more realistic to Google, and that's what you want to happen. But the other suggestion is that you put a picture of the writer. I think that it really adds to the veracity of the whole page if you have not only the person's name but their picture. Now, some people are a little bit hesitant to provide their picture, but others are quite willing and in fact desirous of having their content on an official news publication, and it just goes to kind of further their own career as a writer. So many people provide pictures. In fact, I never submit a newspaper for approval to Google without having the author's picture there. So when I submit a newspaper to Google, it has a set of real people who have written real articles, and sometimes though you can also have pen names for other writers who may not want to publish their name. And if you have a writer who has a lot more time and maybe is of lower cost or whatever and is willing to write under pen names, then you can list some pen names, and you might call it contributing authors or contributing writers and list those pen names. Now, why are pen names ethical? And why did I, how does that match up with what I said earlier about not making up fake names and biographies? Well, it's simply this, that in the newspaper industry, pen names have been used for a very long time, and so it's typical to write under assumed names. Even Mark Twain was an assumed name. But of course, what is not ethical is to fabricate a biography to go along with the name. So I think it's perfectly reasonable if you have a list of pen names and you have no biographies with them and no pictures with them, and you have writers who are writing under those pen names. Now, in fact, some of the writers that you listed above may also have contributed articles that you post under the pen names. So you can have a mix of both kinds of names, and frankly, you want to have, I would think, at least 6 named people with bios and pictures in the top section of your writer's page. And you're also going to want to have an editor, because Google News, when they're evaluating news organizations, they want articles that have been edited, that they've been looked at by more than just the person who wrote them. So in this section, you'll want to have not only writers, but also at least 1 or 2 editors and or writers who serve as editors as well. Those are my recommendations for the writing page, and this is really important. Cannot emphasize it enough. You need to have at least 6 named people. They need to be real people. This is one of the key things that Google looks at in making a decision as to whether to accept your site or not. If there's text in the bios that makes Google think that these are not real people, then they're going to be dubious about accepting you. So this is the first page that I wanted to talk about. The second one that is critical is the Contact Us page, and I'm showing you again Pop Herald's example of their Contact Us page. I'll show you what's in it and then let you know that there are a couple other things that you might think about. Google in the application form asks you for the URL of the Contact Us page of your website. So along with the writer and staff page, they also want to know explicitly what your Contact Us page is. And again, the reason they do this is because they want to know that you are a real organization, that you have an address, and you have a phone number, and you can see that here this company has listed their addresses, both the Filipino address and the USA address from New York City. Now, and in fact, when you apply to Google News, they tell you very explicitly that any contact information that you supply, that they will look at very closely. So it's not a secret. It's very, Google wants you to know that they're going to check you out. Does this address exist somewhere in the world, or is it fabricated? Is it part of a scheme that you have to deceive them into thinking that you're a real organization, but in fact you're not willing to state a real address. So what do you do about this? What if you are an internet marketer, you want to get into the news business, you want to be ethical about it? What address do you use here? Well, it's perfectly acceptable to have home addresses here, and Google, I think, just wants to know what your address is. And in past newspapers that we've submitted for approval, I've used my own personal address at times. I've used the addresses of some of my writers who live in different places around the world. We've had Polish addresses at times. We've had Philippine addresses. We've had South African addresses. So you can be a bit creative about what address you use, but you do want to make sure that it exists, because Google has just told you very clearly up front that the address is something that they're going to check out. So I'm spending a lot of time on this topic because I think that it's one of the key things that will make or break your acceptance into Google. And in fact, it's quite an easy thing to solve. You just put a real address there that's associated in some way with your news organization, and everything is hunky-dory. But those who don't do that, risk putting a ton of work into developing a news organization and writing articles and applying to Google News and not getting in. On the application form, it also says that that email is not sufficient, so they want an address. I include a phone number as well. Now, I've never had Google actually phone up that number, to my knowledge, but I put a phone number in there as well, just to, again, emphasize that there are real people who work for my news organizations. Now, most people, in addition to putting their address and phone number, they also have the Contact Us form located here underneath the address. So, but Google says a Contact Us form alone is not enough for them. They want to see an address, even a phone number, and it's okay to also have email addresses here, but the things that I just talked about are absolute requirements. Now, this newspaper actually includes writer information under their About Us section, and their About Us section is actually very thin. They were accepted into Google News a very long time ago, probably before Google put so much emphasis on checking people out. So here they have absolutely no biographies at all. They just have some names listed, and they don't have a lot of them listed. So I suspect that if they were applying today, they might not actually get accepted with this kind of a team description. So that's what we have to say about pages. The key pages that you must have are an About Us page or a staff page, a Contact Us page, and a privacy policy page. And I will show you the way to set up the privacy policy page in a future lesson.